Good afternoon. Welcome to this melting pot debate called the Internet as a Threat or Gift. Please give a warm welcome to our guest. It's Věra, Jourová, Czech politician and lawyer, the Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency.
Dobrý večer.
Eliška Pírková, she works as Access Now's Europe policy analyst and global freedom of expression lead based in Brussels.
Dobrý večer.
Jakub, Turowski, the public policy director for General and Eastern Europe at Meta.
Dobrý večer.
And Milan Zubíček, who works as the Government Affairs and Public Policy Manager at Google in Brussels.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining us. And before the debate starts, I would like to give you some space to make a few points about the topic if you want. So please, Mrs. Jourová, if you can start.
Good evening once again. To be here in Ostrava during Colors of Ostrava, I have totally different tendencies than sitting here and speaking, but I am so grateful for being here and seeing you being interested in the topic that I will do what you told me to do. Internet as a threat or gift? Definitely, internet is a great gift. And we have to find better ways how to use this for the benefit of the people. I remember several years ago I was in Lisbon at a digital summit, and there was Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is said to be the inventor of internet. And you would not believe that. We saw a very sad man. He was standing on the stage, there were 70,000 people, and he shared with the people his frustration that he was convinced that he is inventing something which will serve communication, education, better relations between people, enlightenment, education. And now he sees that it's being abused against the people. Internet full of hatred and full of violence, full of extremist messages and radicalization, and he called for a new contract on internet. And I think that this is what we try to do in European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Eliška Pírková, if you want to take over from here.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I actually, well, it's not exactly a PowerPoint presentation, but I prepared something for you to visualize better. When we discuss and think about internet, whether it's a gift, it's a curse, it's a blessing, but it can be actually more than that. And sometimes it can be a necessity to survive in certain authoritarian regimes. And just to have access to internet, it's the right that is not or should not be taken for granted, especially when we speak about countries in the global south. So just to start, and I hope that I'll manage, this is the first picture that I sort of picked for you that symbolizes internet as a basic right. It says stop internet shutdowns. Access Now is a global organization that defends and extends digital rights of online users at risk around the globe. And we also monitor a number of internet shutdowns. That means when the country shut down the internet and disable any access, not only to social media, but to anything that is actually happening in the online environment. And we saw alarming numbers throughout 2021, where the numbers of internet shutdowns actually double. Around 182 internet shutdowns incidents around the world in 34 countries. And we know when internet shutdowns take place, they usually use different justifications, such as the protection of public security, protection against disinformation. Basically, it means that during that period of internet shutdown, many human rights defenders will disappear, and there will be a severe crack on human rights activists, dissent, and defenders in general. Then it's internet as a tool of oppression when the states try to take a control of the online ecosystem and online sphere by creating laws that in reality are there again to limit freedom of expression and to close any flow or free flow of information. And we see those laws that criminalize speech, that use vague terminology such as fake news and misinformation, that allow for disproportionate access to users' data just to, again, take the control and limit any possibilities and human rights and fundamental freedoms of users. And then it's the internet as a power of change. And the picture that you see, I'm sure that you are all very familiar with. It's famous Chinese artist and activist Ai Weiwei, who managed to take this picture when he was taken to police custody. And this picture became viral, and the world could find out what is actually happening inside of such as digital authoritarian countries and authoritarian in general, such as China, and other states that actually experience either democratic backsliding, or we cannot really even speak about any state of democracy inside of these countries. And on a regular basis, civil rights organizations collect online evidence of human rights violations and atrocities in war zones and in countries where journalists have no access, and the world has very limited possibility to find out what's actually happening on the ground. And more gradually, we see international courts, such as International Criminal Court in The Hague, using these evidence in order to actually prove atrocities and hold those accountable. And finally, internet as a human rights violator. When we are experiencing and monitoring and seeing swift removals of user-generated content with no public scrutiny and transparency, often done by platforms or algorithmic content moderation and content curation, on the basis that you as a user cannot really understand or have a very limited access and understanding why your content was removed. We saw different carve-outs from content governance policies of platforms, especially during times of crisis and war conflicts, such as illegal invasion of Ukraine, with no proper or meaningful explanation. And we also see uneven application of terms of service of these platforms across the world, especially, again, in the global south. So all of this can be symbolized by internet. And all of these roles and different facets are the part of online ecosystem. And therefore, it's important to really try for a human rights compliant system where all of you can feel safe and where your human rights are respected. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot. And now, Mr. Turowski, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. So before I start, I really wanted to thank the organizers of this event. I think the topic we're talking about here is really what kind of internet do we want for the future. And I have the feeling that sometimes we kind of have these discussions too often among experts. Like I talk with Milan very frequently, and of course we discuss with institutions and stuff. But here we're given the opportunity to really talk to a broader bunch of people in a super popular festival here in Ostrava, and this is really the way to go, I think. So just kudos to the organizers before I start. And of course, thank you very much, Madam Vice President, to be with us to discuss this topic. Obviously, I'm representing Meta, so obviously what I will tell you as a starting point is that, the internet is something extremely positive. I think the main word is freedom and freedom to connect. And it gives freedom to connect, to me, today I was sending plenty of pictures to my daughters about how great festival it is and about how much we're gonna come back here next year, really wow. It is something that gives freedom in much more kind of serious and complex topics, as already has been raised. But unfortunately, I think it's kind of in the nature of human beings to sometimes misuse some tools. And I think it's our, of course, intention, but also responsibility, the responsibility of big companies as Meta or Google, of institutions, of NGOs, of all the stakeholders involved in the internet, to all together sit and really think about what should be done to create an internet that is really useful for the users, an internet where you have this super thin balance from time to time between, on the one hand, freedom of speech, which is really the essence of this tool, but on the other hand, really keeping all the users of the internet safe in any circumstances. So I guess the discussion today will really be about this balance that we all together need to find. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Zubíček, it's up to you.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here in person after all those years of doing everything virtually. Well, similar to Jakub, of course, we are optimistic about the internet, and it can really serve as a lifeline. We've seen this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we worked online, where we communicated, stayed in touch with our families, where we even attended musical concerts and festivals online, although I think we all agree that being here in person is a slightly different experience. And we've also seen the power of the internet during the terrible war in Ukraine, where we are using technology to help users in Ukraine, where refugees can use internet to find information in the local languages, and where we can help humanitarian organizations. So we are optimistic about the opportunities, but obviously there are big risks and challenges that we are facing, and we as a company are taking those risks extremely seriously. And if you look at Google, every day millions of users are coming to our products to verify information that they've seen somewhere, to learn new things, to find new information. So our responsibility is huge, and we are committed to get this right. And the way we are doing this is by removing illegal or harmful content, by raising the authoritative sources, by reducing the reach of the borderline information, and also by working with partners, rewarding publishers, creators, experts in media literacy organizations. And of course, as again our colleague said, the collaboration is key. So maybe today we can speak a little bit more about some of the concrete examples of how we can work together to really benefit from the great things that internet brings, but how we can also address the challenges.
Thank you very much, and we sure we will. So we all somehow mentioned the conflict between freedom and equality online. We know that internet offers a new environment that was originally totally free, but many weaker individuals could be at risk without any regulation. So how to find the right balance? Mrs. Jourová.
How many hours do we have for this trauma?
I understand it's a complex question, so just let's start a little bit.
Yeah, well, the question several years ago was a little bit like Hamlet's question, to regulate or not to regulate. And when I was testing with the member states of the EU, 1/3 was shouting, "Do not touch internet. It must be the zone for free speech and democratic direct communication." Then the other extreme was saying, "Yes, let's introduce tough regulation. And even, you would not believe that, let's establish digital police in the member states." Did you know that, by the way? I protected you against that. And then there was a reasonable middle ground. I belong to that, and we first wanted to the law, which already exists, to be respected online. And also crime and punishment has to function also in online world. And here I speak about child pornography, about extremism, terrorism, and hate speech, as it is defined by our criminal laws. It's not true that freedom of speech is absolutely free. We have limits. We already have limits in our laws. This is what I always discuss when I'm in Washington or in Silicon Valley, the First Amendment of the American Constitution, which speaks about freedom of speech without any limit. And I was in Washington recently, and I have to say many partners were listening carefully when I described what we do in Europe with the code of practice against disinformation. But coming back to legality in internet, so this is the content which is prohibited by the law already now. Then what to do with harmful content which can be very dangerous for real life. Here I speak about disinformation, and here to find the balance you ask about is extremely difficult, because we do not want to limit the freedom of speech when we speak about legal content, and disinformation is legal content, but it can have very big and harmful impact on the society. So when we started to think about whether to regulate and how to regulate this very sensitive topic or this very sensitive phenomenon, I had to realize that we need to have a very strong reason for entering this territory. And for us, the reason was we need to protect better security in our society. We need to protect elections against manipulation. And we already saw that this information changed history. We lost one member state in the EU. The Brits were manipulated extremely strongly and it bore fruits. And the third reason why we started to regulate also this field of disinformation was the need to protect the freedom of speech. And it's not in contradiction. When we speak about protecting security, we speak about the situations when we face very well-designed, coordinated campaigns. Now, all that propaganda, war propaganda coming from Russia, where we just cannot wait for what happens. I think that the era of innocence is gone, especially now in the time of war. When I speak about election manipulation, I mentioned Brexit. We need to get rid of hidden ways how to manipulate the voters before elections. And we want the voters to understand when they open internet and read some text that it is political text which tries to influence their voting preferences. And if it contains this information, the people should be more vigilant and to think about whether they are not manipulated. By the way, maybe you remember Karel Čapek. Even I don't remember Karel Čapek, yeah? Maybe I'm the oldest one here, but Karel Čapek's quote when he spoke with President Masaryk and he asked, what's the difference between crowd and the people? And this is exactly what we have in mind. Manipulation on internet makes of us a crowd. Also by using our private data. Remember the Cambridge Analytica case. So this is the reason why we came with some rules. And the freedom of speech, you mentioned that there is a hidden moderation of the content on internet. The people do not have a clue about what's happening. That's why we came with the rules that the platforms can take measures against some content, but the author of the content has to be informed. And the author of the content, however I may not like such content, the author has to have the chance to appeal against such decision. So there is an interaction. For me, freedom of speech is the highlight in what we are doing in the work of digital regulation. I lived half of my life in communist Czechoslovakia. I remember very well how it feels to be to live in the society where there is one official doctrine and everybody who deviates from the doctrine can go to jail. So for me, the freedom of speech is absolute priority, and we also, by our code of practice and also in the Digital Services Act, which are those pieces of regulation which we introduced, we have this as a main priority.
There is exactly the danger if the political decision would be to protect the weak. How big is the risk that the same politicians will use it to filter content they don't like? Mrs. Pírková, for example.
Wow, what an easy question. So I think that's precisely the question of how we actually strike the balance. But one important thing that we have to realize is that the level of protection of freedom of expression or freedom of opinion and right to form an opinion, which is, by the way, absolute freedom under international human rights law. So there are no derogations from that freedom ever allowed. So when it comes to online manipulation, it's a question mark whether we still speak about legitimate restriction. I don't think that's the case. But it will always go hand in hand with the state of democracy and the rule of law in the country. And within the European Union, in the majority of cases, at least hypothetically, we still have countries where we can actually rely on the quality of the rule of law. And I think one of the important elements to recognize when it comes to the latest efforts to regulate platforms and online ecosystem is that finally we are at that regulatory shift where we are not trying to go after certain categories of content that is deemed illegal, so quickly remove it, delete it, we don't care what you're going to do with it, just get it off the platform, and we don't care whether users have the right to effective redress mechanism or whether there is any grievance mechanism. And before, we didn't even have a prior notice to a user, as Commissioner rightly pointed out. And now all of it exists in the future regulatory framework, which will soon enter into the force, because we finally try to regulate platform systems and processes that they deploy when they moderate and curate the content, when they use our data. And also we have certain protective measures on the paper that will ultimately empower users and that go beyond pure transparency. Even though the fact that transparency now will be legally mandatory for platforms to comply with is already a huge win. Can we prevent with these laws and with their national implementations the risk that they will be abused by the governments, especially those that they experience democratic backsliding? Probably not. And if authoritarian regime wants to abuse any well-intended law that actually stands on the rule of law and democratic principles that the European Union is built on, especially if that state has no independent media regulators in place and control the whole entire public sphere, they will find a way. But we cannot fix the question of the rule of law in one law or two laws and 5 regulations. And there are a number of other measures. And today there is another effort by the European Commission to bring that state accountable. And you can read more about it in the press, or we have the commissioner that can actually speak about it more, where the Commission tries to tackle the issue of the democratic backsliding. It's a long way to go, and it's a huge issue to resolve, but there will always be the space for abuse if there is no strong democracy in place. So we need to find a way how to protect those democracies, and that's a big challenge.
Mr. Zubíček, what's your point of view on this topic?
Well, maybe I can follow up on the Vice President remarks about the code of practice on disinformation, because I really think that it's a very good example of a smart approach to regulating or to addressing such a sensitive topic such as disinformation, which as has been said is not necessarily illegal, but has a huge negative effect on the society and on the individuals. And we as Google have been the signatories of the original code of conduct, the self-regulatory code, back in 2018, which focused mainly on the elections. And we've already seen quite a lot of positive results from that code around transparency of political advertising, protecting elections. But we've heard loud and clear that that code is not enough. It's not strong enough. It needs to be more robust. So we worked with more than 30 other signatories in a very intense fashion, spent many hours together. But we, after months of negotiations, came to a code that really reflects this sensitivity of disinformation. And to Eliška's point, what's strong about this code is that it is not only focusing on removal of the content, which would be one-sided and even counterproductive. But it's really looking at this sort of complex approach to fighting disinformation. It looks at collaboration, so that it really involves signatories from the tech industry, from civil society, from fact-checking organizations. It focuses on things like user empowerment. It focuses on demonetization of disinformation, which is really important. So it just really brings together all those different approaches, which together will, we believe, have a positive effect. We know that the work only starts now. We've just signed the code, but now we all need to stand up to the commitments, and we take it very seriously. But we just think that this is a very sort of smart, dynamic instrument of how to tackle this really challenging topic.
Mrs. Jourová, you wrote in June 22 on your social media about this code, that our new anti-disinformation code marks a new stage of our comprehensive answer to disinformation. Can you be concrete in what way? I'm
sure it is, because it's important to know what the code wants or does. It's important to know what the code doesn't want to happen. And it's exactly this, that nobody should be the arbiter of the truth. It must not be Mr. Zuckerberg. Do you agree? Yeah. It must not be any minister. It must not be me. Of course, I could be well qualified for being the arbiter of the truth, but I will resist. And this is important, that we are introducing a very broad system where there will be a lot of different fact checkers, independent journalists, the platforms themselves, researchers, opinion makers who will work on, how to say it, on delivering the facts. Because we speak here about the facts. It was not said yet. Because we differentiate between the facts, which are verifiable, which are objective, and the opinions, which are subjective and which belong to each individual. And unless it is something which is prohibited, which is calling on killing of somebody, then we must not touch it. And that's our philosophy. I sit very often in the European Parliament. Can you imagine that hemicycle, this big round hall, which is from time to time full of people, not always. And I sit in the middle, and there is far left and far right, and they are shouting. The other day, there was a horrible discussion about who was worse, whether Stalin or Hitler. And you can imagine what was heard from the left side and what from the right side. And I deadly disagree with what the people are saying. But my job is to protect their right to say these things. And this is what the code is trying. In fact, it is mainly the protection of the freedom of speech. If you allow me to add one thing, we discuss here about, or you ask me about regulation of internet. I see the regulation as the third thing which should be done, because no regulation will be perfect, must not be perfect. As the first thing, I see that the society has to grow into some level of resilience, which means that the society should, the people should maybe think about what they read, whether to believe that. And you would be maybe again surprised that now in the time of massive war propaganda, we see that the data of the people, or the portion of the society which is influenced by the propaganda is stagnating or even decreasing. I think the people are fed up of it. Yeah? So this is what I mean by growing resilience. The second thing is fair and open strategic communication from the official places. And we are now working on the proposal how to guarantee heating for this winter. Next week, the Commission will decide on the plan. And we were discussing how open to be, to what extent to inform the people that there are bad things they should get ready for. And we agreed on being as open and as fair and as realistic as possible. The people deserve to hear the truth. And I think this is what I mean. That's the second thing. And the politicians who are caught lying in the past used to be disqualified. I remember such times. And now it's so easy to lie, and if somebody is caught lying, he's pardoned. I think that this is not a very good situation. So what I wanted to say, the regulation is the last one, but necessary piece of work we have to do.
Mr. Turowski, you wanted to react, so please.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe take a step back to really emphasize on the fact that when we're talking about managing content online, we talk about different kinds of content, and hence the approach towards the different content we're talking about should be different. And so, as Madam Vice President said, first we have the illegal content, and here, like, there is no discussion what is illegal should not be on the internet. it's pretty straightforward. Then we have the content that is harmful, and for that, all the major platforms have their policies, and it is in these policies said what can or cannot be on the platform, and of course, all the users can report content they see. We have a mix of then reviewers and more AI that is more and more efficient to really spot the harmful content that we do not want on our platform to keep our users safe, and this is removed. And then, and the more I go, the more it becomes tricky. We have disinformation and misinformation, which are two different things. Disinformation is really when we have some coordinated actions of bad guys, basically, willing to mislead the users. And these are things that we do not allow, and these are things on which we heavily cooperate with all sorts of institutions to spot these. And in a super transparent way, everything is always reported in all sorts of reports about the actions that are taken and the groups that are found to remove these groups, again, for our users not to be misled. And then you have misinformation or fake news, right? And here, as Madam Vice President said, it's really not up to Facebook or Google to say what is true or what is not true. And hence, it is super important to cooperate with a as big as possible panel of stakeholders, as local as possible, people who will understand really the local context, local history, all these fact checkers with whom we cooperate and whose job it is to decide about whether something can be assessed as true or should not be assessed as true. And once something like that is done by the fact checkers with whom we cooperate, then we don't remove the content. We downgrade it heavily on our platforms because we want our users to see less of this content. But on the other hand, we also think that removing completely such content, well, then they will just go somewhere else. And super importantly, we inform. Once something is assessed as being fake news, we show it loud and clear, this is fake news. We also send messages to the people who want to share this content, like, are you sure you want to send this content? This is assessed by fake news by our third-party fact checkers. And this is this cooperation that is a super, super important tool today in our panel of tools to fight misinformation and disinformation online. There is no one silver bullet that will answer this question. It's really, and this is why also, of course, I totally second what Milan said about the code and disinformation. One of the most kind of important aspects of this code is that it's really based on cooperation between big tech companies, third-party fact checkers, NGOs, institutions, and it's only really working hand in hand that we may have a slight chance to win this battle. Last comment, I always say that we may have, and it's kind of related with the resilience topic that you mentioned, we may have the best tools ever on the platform and quite good partners, maybe the best partners. If there is no kind of acknowledgement of the people who use the internet that the internet should be used wisely, then there is a risk that we will not win this battle. And hence education is extremely important. We, of course, as Meta, do a lot of things in all the countries where we operate. Still, I really have the feeling that the need is really immense in terms of media literacy, media education, digital education. When we launch programs for instance, in the countries that I cover, it's really huge, big programs. I'm always it's still a drop in the ocean of needs. So yeah, the regulation is super important, but then this education and media literacy is really something that is extremely necessary if we want to win this battle.
Yeah, that's the thing. We are here focused on the offense, on the threat, but what about the prevention? What is the best way to prevent, to combat, and combat disinformation, fake news, stuff like that? Mrs. Pírková, please.
Thanks. Wow. So let me come up with the perfect solution in 5 minutes. No, I'm not going to have one. But I think the starting point, how to combat different categories of very potentially harmful but legal content, which is precisely what we call disinformation, misinformation, but also other categories of content that fall into that scope, versus illegal content. And we also need to maybe explain that the way how the member states criminalize different categories of illegal content is not exactly harmonized landscape. So we still struggle with that, how to come up with that unified approach that will work across the EU, because these are deeply contextual issues that are always informed by the history and socio-political realities of those individual countries. So there is truly a lot of work ahead of us. But I think we need to also look for a solution that will actually tackle the core of online ecosystem. And despite the fact I know that this is perhaps the argument that might cause certain critical response here, but definitely the way how platforms operate and on what basis and business models they actually operate. So we can speak about the transparency, which is very important, especially when now companies will be obliged to disclose certain information. But also it has to be transparency, which is useful for you as a user and which is useful for a regulator that then has to actually enforce those transparency rules. But at the same time, if you have only one or two options of social media platforms that you can use, because that's where your friends are, that's where your social ties are, that's where your family is. So that's Meta/Facebook, Instagram, that's the same thing, and then maybe YouTube, you name it. And then you have very little or no options to go anywhere else where perhaps those principles and terms of service that govern those platforms will be closer to your values. And then even if you would have that option, you might not be able to actually take all your data with you, so all the pictures, all the connections or friends, everything that you actually have on these big platforms, and migrate somewhere else where you perhaps would be more comfortable. That's one element when we speak about that core online architecture that has to be tackled. And the same goes to your awareness and understanding how those informations are being distributed and why you receive, what you see in your news feeds. Meaningful explanation is one part of it. But having a proper choice to perhaps choose how that content is being organized and curated for you, and not being actually constantly targeted with consent fatigue and being able to even understand the terms of service, how these platforms actually operate, and have that profound understanding of what kind of data you are really providing to those platforms and what kind of different data they use in order to target you or personalize the content for you. That's all still not there. And now we reach the stage when the policymakers and legislators are fully aware of that issue and coming up with the more tools that actually can tackle that core issue. But I think it will still take a number of years, and definitely the online or internet literacy is a big part of it. But also to actually have those tools available to users and have them easily accessible. That's a core minimum that we have to start working on. And everything will depend also on the level how we can enforce those regulations and rules and co-regulatory measures that have now been put in place within the EU. And there is, of course, a lot of regulatory movement happening on the other side of Atlantic too. And so it's great to have a perfect law on the paper, but if you have the enforcement mechanism that struggles and you have understaffed and under-resourced national regulators that just cannot issue a number of complaints that they should, then it's very difficult to actually achieve that high threshold that we are currently aiming at.
I can see that Mr. Zubíček would like to react a little bit, taking notes.
Thank you. No, I fully agree with Eliška. I think that if you look at all those like different aspects, first of all, having clear legal framework is absolutely critical, and you will hear it from us. You will hear it from everyone. We think that having a flexible, clear, robust legal framework that will give legal clarity to everyone who is acting in this space is absolutely crucial. And then, to Jakub's point, the framework needs to really reflect what type of content or what type of issues we are talking about. You don't have one size fits all. This is not going to work. You need to have a framework that is technologically neutral, that is really addressing the specific issue, and that is taking into account this sort of important checks and balances. Then you need to have informed users. Users want to have control. We know users need control. Users are concerned about their privacy. Users are concerned about the lack of digital skills trainings. And this is something that we and others in the ecosystem are trying to address. To Jakub's point, yes, there is always more to be done, but we are all doing our best to really work in partnerships with all the other sort of links to work together on addressing those. To Eliška's point about the user choice, if you look at Google account, this is something where users can go to. It's a profile everyone can choose. Everyone can use Google Takeout to transfer the data elsewhere. Users can log in, log out. Users can sign off. These are all tools that we are giving to our users. And then to the point about digital skills, yes, users really need to understand, and users need to understand the context. They need to know what information they are consuming, how they can consume the information. And one example I can use, we have a special team within Google that is called Jigsaw, that is currently looking in the Czech Republic and in the Central European region on something called pre-bunking, which is helping to users understand this information before they actually see it. And right now, they are working with local experts, with local fact-checkers, with local NGOs, and they are working on content that will specifically help people address this information related to refugees and migrants in Central Europe, because of course we know that there is a risk of those sentiments going up. So all of those things together, none of them is a silver bullet, but working in partnership, working all together, and understanding the challenges is something that can help us together.
So how can digital skills, media literacy, and even critical thinking be promoted across generations, Mrs. Jourová?
Yeah, you ask me who belong to the generation where part of us is technologically excluded. But I think that it's very important that the people of all ages realize they do not want to be objects or data donors, that they are self-confident, well-informed, or want to be well-informed subjects. And I think that this digital self-confidence is something which should start being taught at schools. Mainly the young generation, which still has a chance to grow into more resilient society. And I'm glad we speak about the society, about the people, about, I will not say about consumers or users, but about citizens, because for me this is sensitive. Maybe you remember former German president Joachim Gauck, who said in one of his speeches that he thinks that in Europe we do not have citizens anymore, we only have consumers. And so let's speak about the citizens. And I have to say, when I was in the United States and I discussed with the experts and with the people in the Congress and think tanks about the European regulation and the lack of regulation in the United States, I asked them whether they think that we trust the people less than in the United States. Because we are introducing more regulations which seek to protect the people. Sometimes to protect the people against themselves, not only against the platforms, sorry. And it's a question, I don't have an answer on that. I heard from different knowledgeable people that maybe in the European Union we are more vigilant and more nervous about growing negative factors and trends in the society because of the relatively fresh historical experience, which they do not have in the United States. But still, I have it in my hand. Aren't we too protectionist? And I am asking that maybe you, without hesitating that we are doing the right thing, especially with the code of practice, because it's not intrusive. It's a very broad agreement. But with the digital protectionism, I will try to dig more into that and understand better the reality in Europe.
Mr. Turowski, what do you think about digital protectionism?
Yeah, I think. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think it's there is maybe a slight need here to broaden a little bit and take some helicopter view, because I mean, I of course I fully agree with the fact that the perception, the understanding of freedom of speech in the United States and freedom of speech in Europe is kind of different for all sorts of historical reasons. And I can tell you, like on a daily basis, when I discuss with my colleagues in the United States, I really hear it and feel it. That being said, if we look at the internet on the long term, I think that the big challenge is not here. Because at the end of the day, we Europeans and Americans share a huge bunch of common values. I think that the big discussion moving forward is really about what internet do we have between the kind of US/European internet and more kind of Chinese-like approach to the internet. And I think that the big fear, even though all that we are discussing is of course of like top priority and super important, but moving forward, the big kind of debate should be more on that level. And in our like super complicated times, I think it's like really important to try to kind of minor as much as possible the kind of differences that we see between the United States and Europe, because the challenges are kind of unfortunately bigger sometimes and maybe elsewhere too.
Maybe now let's try to get some questions from the audience. If you have any questions, just please raise hand and wait for the microphone. I will borrow mine.
I was curious that a word that wasn't mentioned, I don't think at all, was the word algorithms. And Ms. Pírková talked about it, essentially the same issue, but in terms of what needs to be regulated, algorithms are too complicated for users to understand. They're buried in code, and that's what ends up determining what content you see and where many of the most provocative and dangerous aspects of the internet are buried. There are some proposals floating around, for instance, in Jamie Suskin's new book, to have independent coders as boards to monitor the effects of algorithms and whether they would agree with the values that communities hold dear in their effect on social media platforms. What do you think? I guess this is basically directed to Meta and Google. What do you guys think about those kinds of proposals?
I'm happy to be to jump in. As already discussed, the main thing here is, I think, to bring more transparency to our users and to empower them, to bring them, to give them more transparency into what they see, why they see something, and also give them more choice into the kind of things that they want to see or don't want to see. I think that's the big challenge. As you rightly said, algorithm is like super complicated. I think what's important is for the users to have maybe more choice in what, in what they see, and also understand why they have in front of them what they have.
Yeah, it's interesting we didn't say the word algorithms, in spite of the fact that this is the core thing also for us as regulators. By the way, not only when we try to regulate internet or the digital platforms, but also artificial intelligence, because we do not want the algorithms used in this new sphere to copy-paste the imperfections and unfairness we have in real life. But coming back to the regulation in the Digital Services Act, the core thing is that the algorithms have to be auditable, and the bodies which will be enforcing this Digital Services Act will need to have people who will be able to look into the algorithms, how they work, and ask on what driver it works. And I think that this is the core thing. There were tendencies in the European Parliament that proposals that we should ban in fact, the algorithms which are used as the marketing method or as the method to sell the products. And the Commission was against that because you will confirm we would destroy the whole business, and this was not the aim of the regulators. So we want the algorithms to be transparent and auditable, but for selling and marketing of the commercial products to consumers. But I want it to be stricter when it comes to algorithms selling the politicians, political parties, political content, and so on. And there I propose the legislation which goes further and which prohibits micro-targeting on the basis of sensitive data and the arrangements in the algorithms using the sensitive data, like the color of the skin, sexual orientation, religion, these kind of intimate and sensitive characteristics of each person. And this regulation will have to be, I hope, adopted soon because we need that, and it won't be easy to promote this regulation, but I don't want to bore you about that.
Mrs. Pírková wanted to react, then Mr. Zubíček, please.
It's an excellent question. So I called it algorithmic content curation and content moderation, and indeed, transparency is the starting point there. So right now, for instance, how these different, let's call them content recommender systems or ad delivery systems, how they're being optimized, on what parameters they're being optimized. That's one set of criteria that should be disclosed to users. Ideally, users would be also able to choose targeting criteria, on what basis they're actually being targeted. And the question is how effective this level of protection at the end is. Because as we know, artificial intelligence or rather machine learning systems are ultimately also being black boxed. I'm very happy that you mentioned the legislation on political advertisement. We have a huge interest as a civil rights organizations in this piece of legislation too. And there are indeed states of automated decision-making processes that will always be opaque and black box to individuals, no matter how much we try to explain them. Because they are opaque and they are black box even for those who actually develop them at certain point onwards. And so for us, certain systems should be simply banned, whether on those that actually use the personal data or special categories of sensitive data, and then we can discuss nitty-gritty details what that ban should actually look like. But once those systems that are especially responsible for ad deliveries, it's close to impossible to unpack them to an extent that the users or individuals could actually be sufficiently protected and aware what is actually happening to them, because there is also, of course, the system on infer data and how individual users are being classified and profiled ultimately. So this is something we as civil society strongly advocate for a very long time. And one important thing, and just going back to your first or second question, you mentioned equality, and I'm so very happy that you did, because we moved beyond the pure discussion around freedom of expression, because discriminatory bias in machine learning systems and the quality of data these systems are actually being trained on, we constantly see extremely negative consequences, especially for underrepresented and vulnerable groups. And this translates to content moderation and content curation tools as much as to facial recognition tools. And we see that every single day. And the prohibition of discrimination needs to be respected in the online environment. And that's something we are also working very hard, whether within the already existing Digital Services Act, which is this new super law issued by the European Union, or my colleagues who work on the AI Act, which is the upcoming new big regulation from the EU as well.
Well, thank you. It's a really an excellent question. And maybe I can just say very quickly how we are actually using the algorithms to protect the users. I mentioned the remove, raise, reduce, and just to illustrate, 90% of the content that we currently remove has been first flagged to us by machines. It doesn't mean that machines automatically remove the content. There is always a human that is in the chain. But the machine learning, the systems are getting better and better in actually flagging the content that might be illegal or that might violate our policies. And the machines and the algorithms are also helping to raise the authoritative content, the quality content from the authoritative sources when it comes to COVID-19, content from trusted publishers, content from public health authorities. And at the same time, if you raise, you also need to reduce. So the algorithms are being used to reduce the reach of this borderline content, this content that doesn't necessarily violate the law or the policies, but it's might be divisive, it might be distasteful, and it's not something that we would like to recommend. So these are all the things that where the algorithms are helping us to moderate content at scale. But at the same time, fully agree with the importance of transparency, auditability, explainability, which I think is extremely important because, algorithms are complicated and it's really important to explain the context. So to users to explain to them how they can be in control. I already mentioned Google account where people can turn off targeted ads, where they can also choose criteria based on which they want to be targeted. So all of those things are already something that we are looking into. And finally, maybe to the question of bias, that's also absolutely critical. And Google has AI principles. We have a set of principles. These are not sort of theoretical concepts. These are principles that we are using against every innovation, against every product change. And one of those principles is that AI cannot promote bias and must. We are always testing and making sure that AI does not promote bias. There is also a principle about safety, about accountability to users. But these are also very practical concepts that we are making sure that we are implementing in all our products and in all our innovations.
It was a very interesting question which needed a very long answer. So let's try to answer briefly one more question, please. Do we have any? It's too many people. Who has microphone?
Thank you. I have a question for Madam Vice President about our youth. What would you recommend to the people involved in the educational services at school and also parents? How to help the kids determine what is right or is misinformation? And also for Mr. Turowski and Mr. Zubíček, if or is Meta and Google helping and how?
I will borrow you the microphone, but please try to be a little bit shorter.
Sure, I can start. Thank you. It's an excellent question. And I think when it comes to trainings, media literacy, I think the key principle is that there is no one-size-fits-all, and we always need to focus on the bottom-up approach. So working with the local partners, working with the local experts, really targeting, using the right platforms to address either youth or an older generation. I think tomorrow my colleagues will have a presentation on Be Internet Awesome, which is one of the digital skills training and media literacy trainings. So if you're interested and if you're here tomorrow, you can also join that one. Let me stop here.
So very quickly, I think what's important is really to fit the message to whom you talk. You don't create the same kind of content for teenagers. You don't create the same kind of content for even younger people, for teachers, or for parents. Parents are often a group that is extremely difficult to talk to because sometimes they are afraid of the subject, and so really targeting the message again is something super important. But also, as I said, the needs are massive. So scalability of the efforts in terms of digital education is also something that is extremely important.
I thought that the question was did I understand well about my youth? No. About how my parents educated me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I became sentimental here. But no, on education, I think the answers were perfect. What I often say that the parents should simply pay more attention to what they their children feel what they, not exactly what they do, but what they feel and what they dream about. And the parents should tell the children or show the children that there is limitless fantasy and limitless world when they can do whatever. And I don't know, we are mainly Czech people here. I think that we have a problem here that the parents try to limit the abilities on the level of themselves. And I was lucky because my parents had a strong hobby. They were dancing and singing in a folk dance ensemble, and they didn't care what I'm doing. And that's why they let me just develop and try to find the beauties of sometimes and dangers of the world. I think that to pay more attention to what the people, what the children feel and want means that for the children, TikTok must not be the father and Facebook must not be the mother. Yeah? And I think that this is one of our current problems.
I have to admit, I'm a human rights lawyer. I do not specialize in education, so I'm going to offer a very limited response to this. But research, at least that I'm familiar with, it shows us that Generation Z is much more privacy conscious. They are actually much more aware of dangers that online ecosystem can actually bring, as well as they are aware of all advantages it can offer. So I could only imagine if educational programs that are being well incorporated into their curriculums from very early on, they would probably fall on very fertile ground. How they're being designed and what needs to be taken into consideration, I'm not that expert to answer that question. But it seems to me, and looking at my nephews, for instance, that things that I was absolutely unaware and blasting all information about my personal life when I was 21, they're much more careful and much more resilient, which is great.
So unfortunately, we need to stop now. Thank you very much for coming, and very big thanks to our great speakers. Thank you for joining us, and all of you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.